What makes a packed gym go silent in the middle of the final game? One folder? And everyone in that room was about to understand why. 72 hours. That's all the warning they got before someone came to lock the doors for good. But one person wasn't ready to walk away. Some deals only happen in the dark. This one got caught on camera. And the person filming it wasn't supposed to be there at all. For years, this was the only place that ever felt like home. Now a kid who could have gone all the way was packing it in, and nobody was fighting for him. He had the money, the lawyers, the whole city behind him. So why did one college student make a man like that so nervous? Then, the night before the vote, a knock. The one woman who'd been dodging her for days stood in the rain, holding the answer to everything. Okay. Picture it. A gym packed wall to wall, everybody on their feet for the championship game. And then this girl just walks onto the court, holds up a folder, that's all. No shouting. But the whole place went dead silent. And what was inside that folder? It was about to tear down the biggest lie this neighborhood had ever been told. But let's back up. Because none of this started on a basketball court. 3 weeks earlier. Same gym, but alive. Kids everywhere, sneakers squeaking, that gym smell you never forget. Down to the last second, ball in the air, and swish. Devin sinks it. 16 years old and the best thing on 2 feet this side of the river. Place went nuts. This little rec center wasn't much. Leaky roof. Floors older than anybody there. But for these kids, it was everything. And right in the middle of it, Nora, 20 years old, a college student who signed up to volunteer here for 1 semester. 1 semester, that was the plan. Now she's tossing high fives, knows every kid's name, already in way too deep. Honestly, she hadn't felt like she belonged anywhere in a long time. Then she found this place. Funny how that goes. You show up to help somebody, and they end up saving you. That's Coach Ruben over there. Arms crossed, trying to look tough. Don't buy it. Ran this center 30 years on almost no money and a whole lot of stubborn. Used to box back in the day. Now he just showed up. Every single day. Rain, snow, didn't matter. For half these kids, he was the only grown-up who ever kept a promise. And that look on his face tonight? That's why he stayed. And you can't talk about this place without Miss Tamika. Ran the little kitchen in the back. Every kid got fed. Didn't matter if they had a dime or not. Nobody ever asked. Grilled cheese, hot cocoa, that kind of thing. Steam on the windows. Kids stacked 3 deep at the counter. She'd fuss at you and slip you an extra cookie in the same breath. You can't fake that kind of warm. This wasn't a gym. It was home. So everything's good, right? Yeah. Never lasts. That same night, while the kids celebrated inside, a black car pulled up out front. Slow. Quiet. A man in an expensive suit stepped out. Didn't even flinch at the rain. Just stood there looking up at that old building like he was measuring it for something. Nobody inside noticed him. Not yet. But that man was the beginning of the end. Or he sure thought he was. Next morning, there it was. A notice taped right to the front doors. Official seal, fancy words. The whole thing. Kids gathered around, trying to sound it out. Didn't get all of it. But they got enough. Something about violations. Something about the building being unsafe. And a date. One of the little ones looked up and asked if they still had practice today. Nobody answered, because nobody knew how. Ruben read it out loud. Slow. Like saying it slower might change the words. 72 hours. That's what they had. In 3 days, the city was voting to sell the land right out from under them. Tear the whole place down. Some developer wanted it, and the paperwork was already halfway done. Reuben just stood there, holding that letter. First time anybody ever saw him look lost. 72 hours. Tick, tick, tick. Devin didn't say a word. Just sat on the bench, turning something over in his hands. A letter. College scouts, real ones, coming to watch him play at the championship. His one shot. The thing he'd worked his whole life for. And now maybe there wouldn't even be a gym to play in. He read that letter 100 times, then folded it up small and tucked it away. Like maybe if he hid it, it'd hurt a little less. But Nora kept staring at that notice. Something about it bugged her. She couldn't let it go. The dates? See that inspection they mentioned? It was dated for a day the center was closed, locked up tight. No inspector ever set foot inside. She read it again, and again. And that's when this cold little feeling crawled up her spine. This wasn't a safety problem. Somebody made it up. On purpose. The only question was, who? So the suit had a name. Grant Holloway. Fancy watch. Whiter than white teeth. One of those smiles that never quite reaches the eyes. He worked for the developer buying the land, the face they sent when things got messy. And that morning, he came to the gym himself. To be helpful. His word, not mine. He told Reuben how sorry he was. Told the kids they'd find somewhere else to play. Real gentle, like he actually cared. And then he found Nora. Looked her up and down, still smiling, and said the words she'd hear in her sleep for a week. Sweetheart, it's already decided. Nothing anyone can do. Sweetheart. Like she was 5. Now, a man like Holloway meets 100 people a day. He forgets most of them by lunch. But here's what he got wrong about Nora. When somebody tells her a door's locked, the first thing she does, she checks the handle. And that little nothing you can do? Yeah. That didn't land the way he wanted. That lit a fire. She just smiled right back and said, "We'll see." He didn't like that. Not one bit. Next stop, City Hall. If that inspection was fake, there had to be a record, a name. Somebody signed it. Nora waited 2 hours on a plastic chair for a records clerk who stepped out. Classic. But while she waited, she spotted a name on the office door. Carmen Vega, City Inspector. The same name signed at the bottom of that notice. So Nora did what Nora does. She walked right up. And the second Vega saw her coming, she bolted. Grabbed a stack of files, wouldn't make eye contact, just hurried off down the hall. "Ms. Vega, I just have one question." Nothing. Faster, almost knocked over a trash can getting away. Now think about that for a sec. This is a woman who signs off on things for a living. Inspections, permits, boring stuff. So why is she running from one polite college kid like the building's on fire? People don't run from questions they've got clean answers to. They run from the ones that scare them. And Carmen Vega? She was terrified. Nora clocked it instantly. Whatever this was, Vega was in it. Maybe not by choice, but she was in it. Here's the thing about people who think they've already won. They get sloppy. Holloway wasn't watching his back. Why would he? In his head, this was over. So when Nora spotted him leaving City Hall, she made a call. A dumb one, maybe. A little dangerous, definitely. She followed him, kept half a block back, tucked in near the shop windows, that red hoodie doing her no favors, honestly. Heart going a mile a minute. She kept telling herself, just see where he goes. That's it. 1 block. 2. Past the bodega, past the laundromat, around a corner. And the whole time, her brain screaming, this is insane. Go home. You're a volunteer, not a cop. But she couldn't. Because every step he took away from that gym, he was carrying a piece of the truth with him. And Nora had this feeling, deep in her gut, that if she lost him now, she'd lose the whole thing. The kids, Devin's shot, Ruben's life's work, all of it. So she kept walking. And what she saw at the end of that street changed everything. Holloway ducked into a little corner cafe. Nora hung back across the street, rain starting up, and watched through the window. He wasn't alone. There was another man at the table, back to the glass, couldn't see the face. And then it happened. Holloway slid a thick folder across the table. They shook hands. Big smiles, the both of them, real friendly. Now, maybe that's nothing. Businessmen shake hands, right? Sure. Except you don't hand over a fat folder of papers in a back corner cafe in the rain if it's nothing. You do that at an office, in the daylight, where people can see. This was the kind of meeting people have when they don't want a record of it. Nora couldn't hear a word, but she didn't need to. She fished out her phone and snapped a photo through the glass. Blurry, rain all over the lens, but you could make them out. 2 men, a folder, a handshake. It wasn't proof yet, not the kind that holds up. But it was a thread. And Nora had learned something a long time ago. You pull one thread hard enough, the whole thing comes undone. That night, Nora didn't sleep. She sat on her floor with every scrap of paper she could get her hands on, laid out in a big circle around her. Notice, permits, old newspaper clippings about the center, a calendar. And she started matching dates. Hours of it. Cross-checking, muttering to herself, 3 cups of cold coffee. And then, there it was, the inspection that found all those violations. Dated March 14th. But Nora had the center's sign-in logs. March 14th, the building was locked. Boiler repair. Closed all day. Nobody in, nobody out. Which meant no inspector walked those halls that day. Which meant the report was written from a desk, made up. Someone sat down and invented a list of problems that didn't exist, slapped a date on it, and signed Carmen Vega's name. Nora sat there staring at that calendar, and honestly, her hands were shaking, not from fear, from how angry she was. These people were about to bulldoze a place full of kids over a lie somebody typed up in an afternoon. But now she had it, in black and white, a date that couldn't be true. Now she just had to prove it before the clock ran out. She needed help. Somebody she could trust. And that was easy. Theo, assistant coach, mid-20s, grew up in this exact gym, ran the kids' morning drills. Everybody loved Theo. Nora did too. So she pulled him aside after practice, and she told him everything. The dates, the cafe, the photo, Vega running. All of it just came pouring out. Because finally, she wasn't carrying it alone. And Theo listened, nodded in all the right spots, said, "This is huge, Nora. You could actually save this place." He even offered to help gather the rest, told her to keep the evidence in the office safe, the locked drawer, so nothing happened to it. Smart, right? Made total sense. And Nora felt this weight lift right off her chest. Someone believed her. Someone was in her corner. She went home that night feeling, for the first time in days, Like maybe, just maybe, they were going to win this thing. Sweet, isn't it? Yeah. Hold on to that feeling. Because sometimes the person who says all the right things, who nods along, who tells you exactly what you want to hear, is the one you should have watched the closest. 2 nights before the vote. Rain coming down hard. Nora got a tip, an address, a time, nothing else. So there she was, crouched behind a parked car in the pouring rain, soaked to the bone, phone out. And she waited. And she waited. Cold water running down her neck, telling herself this was probably nothing. She should go home. And then a car pulled up. 2 figures got out, hoods up, hunched against the rain, meeting right there under the street light, like they thought nobody in the world was watching. One of them pulled out an envelope, thick one, handed it over. Nora's thumb hit record and she did not breathe. Just held that phone steady, eyes locked on the little screen, praying the rain wouldn't wreck the shot. Money changing hands. Had to be. This was how they were greasing the wheels, paying somebody off to make the center disappear. And she was getting all of it. Every second. Her heart was pounding so loud, she was sure they'd hear it across the street. Just a little longer, she told herself. Just get it all. She had no idea how close she was about to come to getting caught. And then, headlights. A second car, coming down the street, slow. Its beams swung around the corner and swept right toward where Nora was hiding. She dropped. Flat against the wet car, phone clutched to her chest, not breathing. The light crawled across the hood, over her hands, inches from her face. If they saw her, if they knew somebody had this on camera, she didn't want to think about it. She just pressed herself into the shadow and went completely still. Rain hammering the pavement, her own pulse thundering in her ears. The headlights held there for what felt like a year. Then, finally, the car rolled on past. Gone. Nora let out a breath she'd been holding so long her chest ached. Slowly, shakily, she peeked over the hood. The 2 figures were gone. The street was empty. And in her hand, that little glowing phone. She had it. The whole exchange. Proof. Real, actual proof that this whole thing was rotten to the core. She ran the whole way home, soaked, freezing, grinning like a maniac. She'd done it. She'd actually done it. Or so she thought. Next morning, Nora came in early to lock everything up proper. The photos, the dates, the video, all of it. She'd stored it in the office drawer, just like Theo said, the safe spot. She pulled the drawer open, and her stomach dropped through the floor. Empty. Well, not empty. Her folder was there, but everything inside it? Gone. The video was still on her phone, thank God. But the printouts, the copied logs, the cafe photo, the paper trail she'd spent days building, vanished. She tore through the whole office. Every drawer, every shelf, under the desk, twice. Nothing. And slowly this awful cold thing settled over her. Nobody broke in. No busted lock, no smashed window. Whoever took this had a key, knew exactly where to look, knew it was there. And only one other person on this earth knew she'd hidden that evidence in that exact drawer. She stood there in that empty office, and she felt sick. Because the math only worked one way. It wasn't Holloway. It wasn't Vega. It was somebody on the inside. Somebody she'd handed the whole thing to herself. Somebody she trusted. She found Theo in the hallway, and the second he saw her face, he knew that she knew. He didn't even try to lie. That was almost the worst part. He just looked at the floor. couldn't meet her eyes. "Nora, let me explain." But there wasn't much to explain, was there? He told Holloway's people everything, where the evidence was, what she had, all of it. And they'd paid him. Turns out Theo was drowning, money he owed, the kind of trouble that keeps you up at night. And they'd offered him a way out. All he had to do was sell out the one place that ever loved him. And the kids, and her. He kept saying he was sorry, that he didn't have a choice, that he never thought it'd go this far. Nora just stood there. She wasn't even yelling. She was too gutted to yell. And you know what she kept thinking about? Not the papers, not the video. She kept thinking about last Tuesday, when Theo carried a crying 7-year-old off the court on his shoulders because the kid scraped his knee. She thought about the mornings he showed up early to sweep the floor nobody paid him to sweep. This was the guy who ran the drills, who the little ones idolized, who taught them the word teammate. She'd sat across from him and handed over every piece of it, proud of herself, actually, while he nodded and told her exactly where to hide it. How do you not see that? She kept turning it over. Every conversation, every kind thing he ever did. Was any of it real? Or was she just easy? "There's always a choice, Theo," she said. Quiet. And she walked away. Because if she stayed one more second, she was going to cry. And she wasn't giving him that. One day left. Her proof was gone. Her friend was a traitor. And the vote was tomorrow night. The night before the vote, nobody went home. They all just stayed. Reuben, Tamika, a handful of the kids, sitting on those old bleachers under one flickering light. Nobody said much. What was there to say? Tomorrow, a bunch of people in suits were going to raise their hands and vote to erase the one place these kids called home. And the folks who could have stopped it? They had money and lawyers and a fake report with a real seal on it. Tamika made cocoa anyway. Force of habit. Handed the mugs around, sat back down. One of the little ones asked Reuben if it was really the last night. And Reuben, this big, stubborn man who never lied to a kid in his life, he opened his mouth and nothing came out. He just pulled the kid in close. That was the answer. You could feel it in the room. That heavy, hollow thing when good people run out of road. They'd fought clean, followed every rule. And it wasn't enough. Because the other side never cared about the rules to begin with. Somewhere across town, in the rain, a young woman was sitting alone with a phone full of videos she couldn't prove meant anything, and a friend who'd betrayed her, thinking the exact same thing they were, that it was over. But here's what none of them knew. Sometimes the thing that saves you isn't the big plan. It's one person, somewhere, who finally can't live with what they did anymore. Devin packed his bag slow. Real slow. Like if he took long enough, maybe tomorrow wouldn't come. He'd already decided he wasn't playing the championship. What was the point? Scouts coming to watch him ball in a gym that was getting torn down the same week. It felt like a joke. A cruel one. This gym taught him everything. First basket he ever made was on that crooked left hoop. Reuben taught him how to lose without quitting, how to win without showing off. Tamika fed him on the nights things were bad at home. And there'd been a lot of those nights. This place didn't just make him a player. It kind of raised him. And now grown-ups with briefcases were taking it. And he was supposed to just smile and perform for scholarship scouts like nothing was wrong? Nah. He zipped the bag, threw it over his shoulder, and stopped at the door. Looked back at the court one more time. Empty. Quiet. all those years right there in the dark. And he almost walked out for good. Almost. But something made him stop. Maybe it was the thought of the little kids who looked up to him. Maybe it was Reuben's voice in his head. You don't quit on the people who never quit on you. He didn't know it yet, but he wasn't going to have to walk away at all. Because at that exact moment, across town, somebody was knocking on Nora's door. It was almost midnight when Nora heard the knock. She wasn't expecting anybody. She opened the door, and there she was, Carmen Vega, the inspector who'd run from her at City Hall. Soaked through, no umbrella, mascara running, holding a big envelope against her chest like it was the only thing keeping her upright. For a second, neither of them said a word. Then Vega just broke. It all came out. 18 years she'd done that job. 18 years, and she'd never once put her name on something that wasn't true. Then a man in a nice suit sat across from her and explained, very politely, how easy it would be for her to lose everything. Her position, her license, the things she'd built her whole adult life on. He didn't shout. People like that never shout. He just laid it out like the weather. So she signed. A report on a building she'd never set foot in. And she told herself it was one piece of paper. One. She went home, made dinner, sat with her kids, and couldn't taste a thing. She hadn't slept right since. She said she'd lie there at 2 a.m. doing math in her head. How many kids used that gym? How many of them had nowhere else to go? Kept telling herself it was already decided, that her name on the page didn't change the outcome. And then she heard the vote was tomorrow. Heard some college volunteer was running around town asking questions nobody would answer. And something in her just gave out. So that afternoon she'd walked into the records office and she'd pulled the real file. The original. The genuine inspection from 2 years back. The one she actually did, with her own eyes and her own hands, that said the building was completely safe. Signed, dated, filed, impossible to fake. She held it out to Nora in the rain and said, I should have done this a long time ago. Nora took that envelope with both hands like it was made of glass. Because it kinda was. She looked at this woman standing on her step, drenched, terrified, ruining her own career on purpose. And she understood something. Courage isn't never being scared. It's being scared, going 20 years the wrong way, and turning around anyway. This was it. The one thing they couldn't lie their way around. The truth. And the vote was in 18 hours. They spread it out on the table and went through it line by line. And it was everything. The real inspection, 2 years old, official seal, Vega's genuine signature, declaring the building safe, sound, up to code. No violations. None. Right next to the fake one. The difference was almost funny. Same name signed at the bottom. But the real one had proper stamps, a case number, a filing date that actually existed in the records. The fake one was smoke. And then there was Nora's video. The rainy night handoff. The envelope full of cash passing between Holloway's man and a city official. On its own, blurry and dark. Maybe you could argue it away. But next to a fabricated report and a genuine one that contradicted it, suddenly that blurry video had teeth. Put it all together and the whole scheme just laid itself out, clean as anything. Fake the violations, scare the inspector, rush the vote, buy the land cheap, tear it down, build something shiny and sell it for 10 times the price. And nobody would have ever known. If one college kid hadn't checked a date on a piece of paper, and one guilty woman hadn't finally knocked on a door in the rain. Nora looked at Vega and said, "We're not too late, but we have to do this in front of everyone, tomorrow, at the game." Vega went pale, but she nodded. Then, morning of the vote, another knock. Nora opened it, and this time it was Theo. She almost shut the door in his face. Honestly, who'd blame her? But he stood there holding out a little USB drive, hand shaking, and said, "Before you say anything, I made copies of everything I took. I couldn't go through with deleting it." Turns out the thing he sold her out for hadn't sat right with him either. He'd taken the money, sure, but he'd kept backups of every document he handed over, because some part of him knew he'd want to make it right one day. And today was the day. He told her he'd testify, stand up in front of the whole city and admit what he did, name the people who paid him, all of it, even knowing it might land him in serious trouble. Nora looked at that USB drive a long time. She was still hurt. That doesn't just vanish. But she also knew you don't fix a broken place by being as cold as the people who broke it. So she took it. "You don't do this for me," she said. "You do it for those kids, and you look them in the eye when you do." He nodded, and just like that, they had a paper trail, a video, an inspector, and a witness. They had everything. Now they just had to get to that gym before the gavel came down. Here's the part nobody planned. The city, trying to be slick, scheduled the final vote for the same evening as the championship game. Figured they'd do it quiet while everybody was distracted by basketball. Big mistake. Because that meant the council members were right there. In the building. In the bleachers. And so was the whole neighborhood. Nora came flying through the parking lot, envelope clutched to her chest, Vega and Theo right behind her, the rain finally letting up. Inside, the gym was electric, packed, loud, the game already going, kids' faces painted, somebody's grandma banging a cowbell. And somewhere in that crowd sat the people about to sign the center away, thinking they'd already won. Nora pushed through the doors and just stopped for a second, taking it all in. This is what they were about to bulldoze. This noise, this joy, these people, all of it. She found Ruben on the sideline. He saw her face, saw the envelope, saw Vega, and this look came over him, like a man watching the sun come up after the longest night of his life. "Tell me you've got something," he said. Nora looked him dead in the eye. "Coach, I've got everything." And then she walked out onto that court, right into the middle of the game, and that's the moment from the very beginning. Remember? The whistle blew. The game stopped. Players froze mid-play, refs lowered their hands, and the whole gym turned to look at this young woman standing at center court, holding a single sheet of paper over her head. For a second, the place was dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop in that packed house. Then Nora spoke. Loud, clear, steady. She told them everything. That the inspection used to condemn the center was fake. That the real one, right here in her hand, proved the building was safe. The people had been paid off to make their home disappear so somebody could get rich off the land. She held up the real report. She held up the fake one. And she said, "You were about to vote on a lie. So before you raise your hands, look at the truth first." The crowd started to murmur, then rumble, then roar. Parents on their feet, kids climbing the bleachers. And up in the stands, the council members who'd come to quietly rubber stamp a demolition suddenly had 500 pairs of eyes on them. There was nowhere to hide. Nowhere to look but at that piece of paper in a 20-year-old's steady hand. And the man who started it all? He was already reaching for the exit. Holloway tried to slip out the side. Of course he did. But Vega stood up. In front of everyone, her whole career on the line, she stood up and said, "She's telling the truth. I signed that fake report. They made me. And that man right there is the one who paid for it." The gym exploded. And then Theo stepped forward too, USB drive in hand, and said he had proof, names, numbers, everything. Holloway froze halfway to the door with the whole neighborhood staring him down. And for the first time, that slick, confident smile was just gone. Nowhere to run. Not with 500 witnesses and a stack of evidence and 2 people willing to tell the truth no matter what it cost them. Security had questions. So did the council. So did some very interested people who make a living asking exactly these kinds of questions. The vote to sell the land? Dead on arrival. You can't sell what you tried to steal with a lie, not once everybody's watching. And the crowd, they weren't booing, weren't ugly about it. They were cheering for their gym, for their kids, for one girl in a red hoodie who wouldn't let go of a date on a piece of paper. Ruben just stood on that sideline with tears rolling down his face, nodding. They did it. They actually did it. And then the gym just came apart at the seams. The good way. Kids screaming, jumping, hanging off each other. Ruben grabbed Tamika, and the 2 of them stood there crying and laughing at the same time. The way you do when something you'd already grieved comes back to life. 30 years he'd fought for that place. Countless nights he figured were the last. And here it was. Saved. Not by money, not by lawyers, by the truth, and by people brave enough to say it out loud. The council didn't just kill the sale. Once the whole scheme came out, the city ended up investigating the developer. And there was talk, real talk, of finally putting money into the center. New roof, new floors, the whole thing. The place that gave everything to everybody was finally going to get something back. Tamika went straight to the kitchen and started making cocoa for the entire building, because of course she did. Ruben found Nora in the crowd, and he didn't say anything clever. He just wrapped her up in this huge hug and held on. "You gave us our home back, kid." And Nora, who signed up for 1 semester, who never felt like she belonged anywhere. She finally understood. She belonged right here. She always had. Oh, and the game? They finished it. Right there that same night, once the shouting died down and the suits slunk off. Because you don't cancel a championship in a gym you just saved. Down by 1, seconds left, and who's got the ball? Devin. The kid who almost walked away for good. He took a breath, the whole place holding its own, the scouts leaning in, Ruben gripping Tamika's arm, Nora on her feet courtside. And he let it fly. Nothing but net. Buzzer. The final buzzer. And the gym went absolutely wild. They carried that kid off the floor. The scouts didn't just want him. 3 of them lined up after to shake his hand, and one asked if his family could come in for a visit that spring. Devin stood there holding a basketball, nodding, trying very hard not to cry in front of his whole neighborhood. He didn't quite manage it. Nobody minded. The rest came slow, the way real things do. The sale never happened. The investigation did. Grant Holloway found out that a man who can talk his way out of anything still has a hard time explaining a signature on a document that describes a building he'd never entered. Carmen Vega told the truth about all of it, and it cost her. But she kept her name, the part of it that mattered. Theo told the truth too, and stood in front of those kids while he did it. It didn't fix things, but he showed up. That counts for something. In the center, new roof by summer, new floors by fall. The place that gave everything to everyone finally got something back. Later, when it was quiet, Nora stood in that empty gym one last time before heading home. Same crooked left hoop, same scuffed floor with the faded lines. She could still smell the cocoa from the kitchen. Somewhere down the hall, Reuben was turning the lights off one row at a time, the way he'd done for 30 years, the way he'd get to keep doing. She thought about how she'd signed up for one semester, how she almost didn't come at all that first day. Funny, isn't it? The smallest decisions. Some places are worth fighting for. And sometimes all it takes is one person who refuses to look away.